In 2016, Orlando, Florida's police department lost 3 of their officers. My name is Santiago, and in this episode of the Strawberry Ink podcast, you will learn how a black man unusually caused the death of these 3 officers and became America's most wanted criminal. This black man was Markeith Loyd. He had a troubled childhood, and in 1975, was born into a broken home. His dad, Robert Loyd, was in the U.S. Air Force. He was a frequent drinker and drug user. Both him and Markeith's mother, Patricia, would fight in front of him as an infant. They would shout at each other, hit each other, and throw objects at each other. One of the objects that was thrown was an empty fish tank sitting in their home. At one point during a fight, Patricia threw baby Markeith at his father. Markeith survived being used as an object to throw because his father caught him and gently set him on the ground. Markeith's father then died in the family's living room couch of a heart attack which was caused by his frequent cocaine use. Despite the unhealthy conditions, family court records from 1980 show that neither of the parents ever lost custody of the children. He was raised with his now single mother, Patricia, who would leave the house during the day to work entry-level jobs and support the family. They lived in Orlando, Florida, in a neighborhood where KKK members would roam and beat up black kids like Markeith. This was a stressor in his life growing up, which caused him to feel oppressed for being black. The family was poor, and in one of their holiday seasons, they were about to have no Christmas presents. However, Markeith's grandparents gave him $100. He used this money to buy drugs and sell them throughout his neighborhood. That is when his drug dealing career took off. By selling these drugs, which is believed to have been cocaine, he saved Christmas, buying him and his family presents. As he got older, he started committing infractions more often, and also started getting arrested for misdemeanor crimes. When his mother found out he was selling drugs, she sent him to a mental institution where he remained for days. After he was released from there, his behavior stabilized for the time being. He would go to church more often, participate in their choir, and attend school. After graduating high school, he started working entry-level jobs just like his mother, mainly at restaurants. Markeith would also go to the gym to work out and had children through women whom he had dated throughout the years. His first ever arrest was for a felony in 1994 for illegally carrying a handgun in the streets. He was only 19 years old. He has well resisted arrest in this incident. If you are under 21 in America, you are prohibited from carrying a handgun in public. Markeith faced 2 felonies in this case, a weapons offense and a charge for resisting arrest. Months later, with a bargain, he entered a plea of guilty on the first day of a bench trial and was fined $310. That same year, he would be arrested 4 more times for misdemeanors, a battery case in which he pleaded no contest to and was fined $1,000, a trespassing case in which he has well resisted arrest and would be dismissed from it due to the charges being dropped for insufficient evidence, an illegal gambling case which he immediately pleaded no contest to and was fined $500, as well as another trespassing case in which he pleaded no contest to and was fined another $500. The other trespass case, which had been dismissed, was reopened in another court filing due to him resisting arrest. He was charged with a misdemeanor of resisting arrest during a crime and was fined $220 after pleading no contest. In 1994, he spent a total of $2,500 in bail money. The following year, Markeith would get into trouble for selling drugs. He was arrested for being in possession of them, but there was no proof to accuse him of drug trafficking. So instead, he faced 2 felony charges of possession of a controlled substance and another controlled substance offense crime. Due to a lack of evidence, the prosecution chose to no longer pursue this case and let him go. The case would later be reopened in another court filing, but there was no probable cause to continue to accuse Markeith of these drug crimes. In this year, Markeith was charged $7,500 in bond money and $40 in court fees. Then in 1996, he would continue to commit drug offenses. He faced more drug possession felonies, which would as well be dropped due to a lack of evidence. Markeith then faced similar offenses, but as misdemeanors, ones which prosecutors would back up and dismiss as well. It was difficult to prosecute Markeith for crimes and lock him up. Also in 1996, he and his friends were accused of robbing and killing somebody by shooting them. The Orlando police suspected that the killers were people like Markeith who would roam the street. He was caught first and arrested, being charged with second-degree murder. Witnesses questioned by police claimed that Markeith joked about somebody being killed. These witnesses also described the friends that he joked to. The prosecution still wanted to send him to prison for second-degree murder, but they would rather have a grand jury indict him on this charge in order to put him in more trouble. Once the rest of the suspects were captured, the prosecution dismissed the charge against Markeith and started a new case. They all thought these were racist arrests and that they were accused of a murder they did not commit for being black. This new case was presented to a grand jury in Florida's Orange County Courthouse. The grand jury indicted them on second-degree murder and robbery charges, both felonies. They would remain in jail for several days, but the court then would drop the charges, also for a lack of evidence leading to their arrest. Markeith, however, who was mostly concerned, was ordered to return to court on a misdemeanor for having resisted arrest. He complied, and in a docket, he pleaded no contest to the offense, being fined $115. In total that year, he spent about $27,500 in bond money. For one of the times when he resisted an arrest for drug crimes, he was called back to court once again in 1997 due to another misdemeanor resist charge. His bond had been set to $250, and he was fined $175 after pleading no contest. One day in 1998, Markeith had been selling drugs again and was caught. He fled from the police and drove off. Markeith then resisted arrest and assaulted at least 2 officers. Both the Orlando Police Department and Orange County Sheriff's Office worked together to arrest him. He was tied to 3 felony cases for this violent incident, one for state drug trafficking crimes, the other for federal drug trafficking crimes, and another for assaulting the police officers. For the assault case, Markeith invoked his right to a speedy trial. He faced a total of 3 felonies and 2 misdemeanors. Months later, a state jury convicted him of 2 felonies and 1 misdemeanor. This meant that Markeith was now a convicted felon. The only charges in the case that did not affect him were the remaining felony, which the jury acquitted him of, and the remaining misdemeanor, which the court dismissed before sending the case over to the jurors. A month after this verdict was read, he was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. With the prosecution already having sent Markeith to prison, they chose to dismiss his state drug trafficking case and no longer prosecute it. Then in his federal case, with an agreement between parties, it was added to his assault sentence and no new trial had to be held. On the day Markeith was arrested, he broke traffic laws, leading to him facing 5 infractions, which meant 5 more court cases for him. While fleeing from the police, he did not have his driver's license on him. He did own a license at the time, but it was suspended. The vehicle he was driving had no insurance and was not registered. Markeith as well had been driving erratically. One of his traffic cases was for operating a vehicle without a valid driver's license, the other for driving with a suspended license, the other for failure to comply with insurance requirements, another for failure to register a motor vehicle, and another for careless driving. One of the cases was dismissed by the prosecution, meaning the Orlando Police Department, because they felt that there was no need to move forward with it. He was fined a total of $394 for 3 of the traffic cases, but never paid it off. Markeith as well was sentenced to 14 days in jail for 2 traffic cases combined, but the sentences would run concurrently, so it would only last 7 days. However, due to him having already been in jail for the felonies, he just received credit for time served. Not paying the fines would have sentenced him to more jail time, but since he would already be locked up for the years to come, it was a whatever for the prosecution and they just let it be. Markeith was transferred from the Orange County Jail to the federal prison in Beaver, West Virginia, known as the FCI Beckley. This is a good stopping point. I'm gonna take a break and be back shortly. Stay tuned. Hello there, I am back. I had a restful night, and I am happy to be finishing up this episode. I know I've spoke about things not related to the main shootings of Markeith Loyd, but I have covered his history and I will continue to cover his story. But I promise to you we will get to the shooting part. And right now we're gonna talk about his relationships for at least 1 minute or less. So anyways, he had several kids with different women and many times was involved in family court filings to decide the custody of the children or other actions that had to be taken with them while he was in prison. This occurred in 1998, 1999, 2000, 2001, and 2003. In 2002, while at the FCI Beckley, Markeith beat another inmate. He faced a battery charge for this, which was going to be prosecuted back in the Orange County Courthouse, but it would shortly be dismissed by the court because Markeith appeared to have been defending himself during the incident. For that reason, they chose to not even pick him up and bring him back to the court. After his release from prison in 2003, Markeith had seemed to stop committing illegal activity for some time, until 2014, when he once again drove recklessly. He faced infractions in 2 different traffic cases. One was for careless driving, the other was for failure to comply with insurance requirements, because the vehicle Markeith had been driving with had no insurance. The Orange County Courthouse Traffic Division would shortly after adjudicate him guilty for both offenses due to the incident having occurred in a school zone. Markeith had refused to enter a plea, but did stand up for the consequence and pay his fines, which was a total of $282. The following year in 2015, Markeith had seemed to care even less about the law. He was one of 6 people in the county who had tried to avoid paying their local taxes. Orange County, Florida sued these 6 individuals, their tax collector, their code division team, and the U.S. National Bank Association for being involved in this massive tax evasion spree. The prosecuting attorney in the case, Scott McHenry, consulted with each defendant and allowed them to settle the lawsuit outside of court, which is what led to a dismissal. Shortly after that, Markeith's girlfriend at the time, LaCarsha Robinson, sued him for domestic violence due to aggressive behavior he was accused of during their relationship. Markeith himself as well accused the girlfriend of domestic violence and sued her back. These lawsuits were settled outside of court and the cases were dismissed. Both then split up. That same year, Markeith went out driving. He was speeding and ran a stop sign. The police pulled him over and scanned his driver's license. The license was foul because he did not change the home address on it after splitting up with his girlfriend and moving somewhere else. This meant that Markeith had to go to court once again for 3 different traffic cases because he had committed 3 infractions. The cases for speeding and failure to change the driver's license home address were dismissed. Then the last one was for running a stop sign. This was settled in a form different from his last traffic cases due to the incident having occurred in front of a school. Markeith was ordered to pay a $164 toll to this school and attended a traffic education session. He paid off this toll and went to traffic school. Once again, he received his certificate. The case was finally closed. Then, in 2016, the gruesome of the gruesome would occur. Markeith met a black woman on Facebook named Sade Dixon. The pair would eventually meet up, start dating, and live together. It was a good relationship. The couple was even preparing to have a baby once Sade became pregnant. However, the relationship would then become stressful because there were lots of disagreements between Sade and Markeith. They would constantly argue. One of the things that was really upsetting Markeith about Sade was that she would smoke during her pregnancy. The conflict within their relationship would become physical, and Sade would depend on her family to keep her safe. In 2016, a woman got into a fight with another woman. They had been fighting over rumors that were spreading throughout their neighborhood. This woman was pushed and sprayed with mace during the fight. She then fled the scene and went back home. Markeith and his neighbor, 41-year-old Elton Purdy, showed up at the woman's house and confronted her. Elton ran her over with his car, and Markeith pointed a handgun, threatening her. The woman called the police and reported the incident. Those who had participated in the fight settled their issues among themselves and did not face serious trouble. The woman knew her suspect, Elton Purdy, and snitched him out to the police. They cited him for careless driving and he had to appear in court. Purdy was found guilty of the infraction after a bench trial and was ordered to complete traffic school as well as to pay a toll to the woman of $164. Markeith, on the other hand, could not be identified at the time, but he was believed to have threatened the woman at least 3 times. Weeks would go by without him being arrested for that. Then in December of that year, Markeith would act violently once again. Him and Sade were arguing. The conflict ended with him biting Sade's ear. She left the home and would start staying at her parents' house. She did not inform her family that Markeith had bit her, but did mention that there was stress in their relationship. Then 3 days later, on the 13th day of the month, Markeith was at the home where Sade was staying and knocked on the door. Her family had been eating dinner at the time, around 9 p.m. Sade opened the door and stepped out to speak with Markeith. The pair got into an argument and were shouting at each other. Sade's brother then came out to check on them, and her mother was on her way outside as well. That is when Markeith shot Sade, killing her and their unborn baby. He then continued shooting, injuring Sade's brother, Ronald Stewart, and almost injuring their mother. Ronald had pushed their mother inside their house to keep her from being shot. Markeith continued shooting. Ronald was almost shot again, which could have killed him. The mother was not injured because Ronald pushed her inside, as Ronald fled. Markeith once again tried to shoot him. He then fled the scene. The cops were called, and Markeith was identified as the shooter the following day. A warrant was then issued for his arrest, and he was now a wanted criminal, staring on the news. After the shooting, Markeith went back home and called his niece, Lakencia Smith Loyd. He informed her that he shot Sade, and claimed that he did so because she pulled out a gun and threatened him. Lakencia never reported this phone call to the police. Markeith then called his ex-girlfriend, Jamae Slaughter, and told her the same thing. He then left the home and fled, hiding from the police. Nobody knew anything about Markeith's whereabouts. He was all over the national news. Markeith's ex-girlfriend Jamae Slaughter went to his house and roamed around the residence, asking people for money in order to raise funds for him. She raised about $200, with most of the money having come from Markeith's manager. The people who had been asked for money snitched on Jamae and called the cops on her. The police showed up and confronted Jamae. They asked for her name. She gave them a fake name and was panicking while the cops confronted her. The cops then arrested Jamae and took her to the Orlando police station. After further investigation, they found out that she had given the officers a fake name and had been in contact with Markeith Loyd. She was then booked into the Orange County Jail on charges of accessory and given a false name to law enforcement, both felonies that could have landed her in prison for years. Each charge had its own separate court case due to its huge differences and uniqueness. Her bail was set to $750,000, which is an amount of money Jamae could not afford, meaning that she would remain in jail. The Orange County Sheriff's Office obtained several search warrants for Markeith Loyd. They searched his phone's data and listened to his calls. The call with his niece, Lakencia, was deeply investigated, which led to her being accused of failing to report Markeith Loyd to law enforcement, despite knowing he was a highly wanted killer. Investigators reached out to Lakencia and spoke to her. She turned herself into the office of a lawyer she hired. She was taken to the police station in Orlando for processing. Just like Jamae Slaughter, she was booked into the Orange County Jail on a $750,000 bail, making her unable to be released. She faced a felony charge of aiding a suspect and was arraigned a day after her arrest, having spent the night in jail. Lakencia pleaded not guilty, and her bail was reduced to $10,000 due to her alleged crime not being so severe. After this court hearing, she posted the bail and was released from jail. It was then time for Markeith's ex-girlfriend, Jamae Slaughter, to be arraigned. She as well pleaded not guilty to her charges, and her bond was now set to $500,000. The price she needed to be released from jail was not granted to her, so she stayed behind bars as she could not afford her temporary freedom. The decision to not reduce Jamae Slaughter's bond all the way to an average affordable price was because she seemed to have really been trying to assist Markeith Loyd in evading the police. She was even believed to have driven around the Walmart grocery store where he would usually shop at. LaKensha did not have a history of committing any serious crimes. Her only felony was in 2010 for ordering a false check at her local bank. This charge was dropped after the Orange County DA's office ruled that there was not enough evidence to criminally prosecute her for this. Prior to 2017, she had been ordered to return to court 4 times for traffic citations, one being as a violation and the others as infractions. They range from the years 2008 to 2015 for offenses such as running a red light, driving with a suspended license, driving without wearing a seatbelt, and a child restraint violation. With tolls and fines, she was ordered to pay about $826.50. This was a small criminal history, no serious convictions, just small traffic offenses. LaKensha seems to have been an understanding and easy-working person. When she was evicted from her apartment in 2017, LaKensha worked things out with the complex's administration and settled the dispute, leading to the complex letting her stay with them. In 2010, she had a financial dispute with her ex. Instead of confronting and violently fighting him, she filed for an administrative support order and settled things as well. Markeith's ex, Jameis Slaughter, was facing 2 felony cases. One of them contained an accessory charge, and the other one was a charge of giving a false name to law enforcement. The false name crime did not seem as severe, so the case was transferred from the county DA's office to the city attorney's office of Orlando. She no longer faced that felony, it was now a misdemeanor. Therefore, she faced less prison time. Her only felony at this point was the accessory charge. Jameis had no prior history of having committed felonies. She had just faced 2 misdemeanors in the past, one in 2009 and the other in 2011. She was arrested for battery in 2009, posted a $250 bail, and was sentenced to 30 hours of community service after pleading no contest. Then in 2011, Jameis was arrested for trespassing on a tennis court. She was released from jail after posting $500 as bond. This case was dismissed after the prosecution chose not to take over the case since it wasn't worth prosecuting. The whereabouts of Markeith were unknown. However, he was believed to have gone to Volusia County, Florida, while on the run from police, and then returned to Orlando. Markeith was indicted and charged with serious felonies in connection to the death of his murdered ex, Sade Dixon. They were first-degree murder, killing of an unborn child by injury to the mother, attempted first-degree murder with a firearm, illegal firearms possession, and 2 counts of attempted felony murder. There was then believed to be conflict between their relationship due to Markeith having been married to another woman while he and Sade were dating. Some paperwork came into the Orange County courthouse while he was still on the run. It was because he had filed for divorce against this other woman. Sade Dixon's family held a private funeral for her and requested that no obituary be released to the public. She was cremated, and her parents have since kept her ashes. The holiday season passed, and Markeith was nowhere to be found. Then, in the early morning of January 9th, 2017, around 7 a.m., Markeith went to the Walmart where he would regularly shop at. He was there to get necessities. He spent about an hour in this grocery store putting errands into his shopping cart. But at the same time, an Orlando police officer, Deborah Clayton, was as well shopping for groceries in this Walmart. She planned to go to work after getting what she needed and was already in her uniform. Both checked out around the same time. One of the Walmart employees recognized Markeith Loyd, who had been wearing body armor, and informed Officer Clayton. Clayton took a peek at Loyd and radioed that there was a murder suspect in the Walmart where she was at. Clayton immediately let go of her shopping cart, chased him, and drew her taser. She ordered Markeith to stop running and was seeking to arrest him. So he shot her and continued running off. He got his stuff, got into his car, and fled. Orange County Deputy Joe Carter recognized Markeith's car as he fled and started following him. He followed Markeith into an apartment complex, and the pursuit would stop. Markeith got out of his car and fired 2 shots at Deputy Carter's vehicle. Carter survived and was not injured. Markeith then fled on foot and stopped someone's car. He shot at least 2 times in the air and ordered the person to get out of their car. He then drove off, stealing it and driving it through a fence. Then the person whom Markeith had just carjacked recognized him and called the police. Officer Deborah Clayton called for backup before being shot. They then called for an ambulance after finding her on the ground bleeding. While the ambulance arrived, the backup officers performed CPR on her. Once the ambulance arrived, paramedics and EMS took over to try to save Clayton. They took her to the Orlando Regional Medical Center for surgery. The city became a dangerous crime scene, and 17 Orange County schools went on lockdown. On that same day, Markeith was named as the suspect responsible for shooting Clayton. A police chase then started as law enforcement agencies were aware that Markeith had carjacked someone, but he managed to escape once again. Norman Lewis, a deputy from the Orange County Sheriff's Office, was riding a police motorcycle at the time of this chase and joined in to try to stop Markeith. Lewis unfortunately lost his life due to this chase when a Honda van crashed into him. This van was driven by 78-year-old Billy Gerard, who was not paying attention while driving. Gerard got into no serious trouble because the crash was ruled accidental. However, he was fined $1,000 and his license was suspended for 6 months. As of 2018, the fine had been paid off. Gerard was shortly after caught driving again during his license suspension and had to go to court for that, but the case was dismissed. The Florida Auto Club Insurance Company sued both Billy Gerard himself and Deputy Norman Lewis's estate over the financial damages caused by the crash. This lawsuit was completely settled outside of court. Lewis's family as well sued Billy Gerard for the fatal crash. The court then ordered Gerard to pay the Lewis family off for the damages that had been caused from the crash. Meanwhile, the search for Markeith continued and shocked the nation. During the search, Billy Gerard successfully paid the Lewis family and was dismissed from the lawsuit. The U.S. Marshals offered a $125,000 reward to whoever provided them with information that could lead to the arrest of Markeith Loyd. The state of Florida as well announced an award. They offered $60,000 for whoever submitted a tip leading to Markeith's arrest. There were at least 1,400 tips submitted to the agencies participating in this manhunt. His son, Markeith Loyd Jr., was in the Orange County Jail while Markeith was on the run. In a recorded jail visitation with his mother, he claimed that he knew his dad would flee from police. Jr. had been arrested 3 times in the span of weeks for theft and assault-related crimes. he was being held in that jail without bond. This was believed to have been due to deteriorating mental health. In January 2016, Junior was busted for careless driving and had to go to traffic court. He was fined a total of $187 and paid it off. Later in August of that year, his behavior would become more violent. He wrestled a teenage girl out of her car, stole her phone, and drove off. The girl's mother called the cops to report the incident. Through this stolen phone, the police tracked him down and arrested him. Junior was released on bail and would weeks later be arrested again outside a Walmart different from the one where his father shopped at. He entered the Walmart and filled his shopping cart with groceries. Junior then bagged the groceries and set them back into the cart without paying them. He then ran out of the store, which caught the attention of its manager. As Junior took the groceries out of the cart to flee with them, the manager confronted him. Junior elbowed the manager and ran off with the groceries. The manager called the cops and described Junior. The cops arrested him and took him back to the Walmart. The manager then took a peek at the squad car and confirmed that Junior was the right suspect. The groceries were then returned, and Junior once again landed in the Orlando police station. He was then returned to jail. He would go on to post bail for the last time and be released from the Orange County jail. Junior committed his last crime days later. He went to an apartment complex once again to steal a car. Junior punched a car's driver and claimed that he was stealing it. The driver then fighted Junior in self-defense and detained him until police arrived to arrest him. Junior was left with his face all bruised after the incident. After his last arrest, Junior was denied bail and kept in jail. His three cases were all in Orange County, and the crimes had occurred in Orlando. For two of his arrests, Junior was charged with robbery, grand theft. Then for the remaining one, burglary, attempted carjacking, and robbery. His father, Markeith Loyd, was considered a dangerous fugitive who had become America's most wanted criminal. While on the run in 2017, Markeith's landlord evicted him due to his rented home having become the center of a criminal investigation. This eviction was filed hours after Markeith shot Deborah Clayton, the officer who tried to arrest him at the Walmart. Unfortunately, despite the measures to save her life, Clayton was pronounced dead at the hospital. The Orlando Police Department and SWAT officers searched an apartment complex where Markeith Loyd was thought to be hiding, Brookside Apartments. However, the complex was cleared, and the tip that had sent them there was a false alarm. After 3 p.m. on that day, the school lockdowns in the area were lifted, and students were allowed to go home. Then, that evening, the Orlando Police Department created a GoFundMe on behalf of Officer Clayton's family, and a fundraising goal of $10,000 was set. However, many members of the department and the public donated, making it reach $13,000 within hours. These funds would go on to cover her funeral expenses. The following day, a rental home in Claremont, Florida, where Markeith was suspected of hiding in, was searched without a warrant, but with the consent of its landlord. This tip, however, was also a false alarm. By this time, the FBI had considered Markeith Loyd as one of their most wanted suspects and started highly publicizing the case. Florida's tip line award was then raised to $100,000. The Orange County Sheriff's Office announced that there would be arrest warrants filed for anyone who helped Markeith hide from the police. Later that evening, a public vigil that had been highly publicized on Facebook was held outside the Walmart where Deborah Clayton was shot. A restaurant where Markeith Loyd worked was investigated with warrants and searched. This was the New Texas Fried Chicken restaurant, which was run by Markeith's manager, Zarhi Mayan. Mayan was believed to have made contact with Markeith Loyd while on the run, given him at least $200, and fed him free food from the restaurant. This led the cops to arrest him and interrogate him at the headquarters of the Orange County Sheriff's Office. Mayan helped detectives and informed them that Markeith had been wearing a bulletproof vest the last time he saw him. The investigators then observed the surveillance footage of Markeith at the Walmart and noticed that he did seem to have a vest under the sweater that he was wearing that morning. Mayan was then booked into the Orange County Jail on an accessory charge. He was denied bail and would remain in jail for the next few days. While the hunt for Markeith Loyd was still ongoing, the Orange County Sheriff's Office started a GoFundMe on behalf of the family of Deputy Norman Lewis, who died during the chase. It raised over $46,000. On January 12, 2017, Lewis's funeral visitation was held at the Woodlawn Funeral Home in Gotha, Florida. The next day was supposed to be a service, but it got postponed due to a family emergency. His funeral service was then scheduled for the 15th. Many of his loved ones attended. Lewis was then buried at the Charlotte Memorial Gardens in Punta Gorda, Florida. While this funeral service was going on, Haines City in Polk County, Florida was searched because many of Markeith's family members lived there. A day before Lewis's funeral service, Deborah Clayton's services were held. Both her visitation and mass were held at Orlando's First Baptist Church, where she was laid to rest at the Woodlawn Memorial Park in Gotha, Florida. Markeith was still nowhere to be found, so the U.S. Marshals released photo edits of him with a shaved head, in case he had changed his appearance. Then, on the 17th of January, in the evening, police finally got Markeith's location right and surrounded an abandoned Orlando house where he was hiding. This was one of the only useful tips that civilians had submitted to law enforcement. Markeith tried to escape through the back of the house by sliding a glass door that would take him to the backyard. However, he then gave up, dropped his firearms, and got down on the ground, complying with law enforcement. He crawled out of the house wearing body armor. While on the ground, an officer kicked him. This officer would later go on to claim that the kick was done to the body armor, and it was a way of making sure there was nothing behind that armor. As the officers surrounded Markeith, he resisted arrest and fighted them. The officers beat Markeith, permanently damaging his eye. Markeith was taken to the Orlando police station. There, he complained about his handcuffs being too tight. He was interrogated there, and officers taunted him. Markeith asked for an attorney during the interrogation, and the questioning should have ended there. In the first place, Markeith should not have been taken to the station immediately after having been beat and injured during his arrest. It would make sense for him to sue Orlando's police department for that. However, after the interrogation, he was taken to the Orlando Regional Medical Center where Officer Deborah Clayton died. This was also the hospital where Markeith's ex, Sade Dixon, her brother, Ronald Stewart, and Deputy Norman Lewis were taken. On his way out of the station, Markeith yelled, "They beat me," at the news reporters, referring to the officers. The following morning, Markeith's manager, Zarhi Mayan, pleaded not guilty to his accessory charge, and his bond was set to $400,000. The bond was set this high because prosecutors wanted him to remain in custody and no longer tamper with Markeith Loyd's investigation. Mayan appealed the court's decision of having him remain in jail and pleaded for a cheaper bond. Hours later, Markeith was discharged from the hospital after having spent a night there being treated for his bruises and taken to the Orange County Jail. His manager, Mayan, who was from Afghanistan, was granted a $20,000 bond after appealing to be released from jail. This appeal was granted to him because since Markeith was already in jail, there was nothing to worry about. Besides, Mayan did not have a violent criminal history. He was once involved in an altercation in 2011 with one of his restaurant's customers and faced a felony battery charge, but there was no evidence to incriminate him, and Mayan claimed that his actions had been justified due to the issue with this difficult customer. That is not for sure though. The person who called the cops on him stated that Mayan threatened and hit him in the stomach with a piece of wood, and that Mayan's wife spit on them. Mayan was arrested because he was the only manager at the restaurant, and the Orlando police declared him responsible for whatever occurred there, since Florida's law requires all restaurant owners to report illegal acts to law enforcement as soon as possible. Florida's Attorney General had dismissed that charge after reviewing the case. Mayan was ordered to go to traffic court 15 times between the years 2011 to 2015. This was for not having his driver's license on him when pulled over, or driving while it had been suspended, expired, or while he had an expired tag. Driving without insurance as well, making an improper turn on the road, running a stop sign, running traffic lights, disobeying a traffic control device, unlawfully parking in the handicapped spot, and speeding. Many traffic infractions. In total, Mayan had to pay $2,624.11 in fines for these traffic cases. These small cases were either settled or he was adjudicated guilty in court. One of the 2014 traffic cases was a violation, and the rest of them were infractions. In 2015, he was ordered to go to court on a misdemeanor of cannabis possession after he had been caught with 20 grams of weed. This was because Mayan's car smelled like weed, which caught the attention of an Orlando police officer who would stop him and search the car. Mayan admitted that there was weed in there. He could not be arrested for that, but could be forced to go to court. Therefore, he was issued summons. However, Mayan never made it to court because the city of Orlando's prosecutor's office chose not to pursue the case since it was too unusual, leading to the court date being canceled. The remaining legal conflict Mayan was involved in was a business partner whom he had financial disputes with. His wife as well had financial disputes with this business partner. As a result, in 2014, Mayan, his wife, and their restaurant's franchise faced a federal lawsuit in the Middle District of Florida. This lawsuit was settled the following year outside of court, leading to the case being dismissed. Despite all the legal drama Mayan had been involved in years prior to that, there was nothing serious to shame him with. Mayan tried to have this bond be lowered to $10,000 instead, but the request was denied. He then posted the $20,000 bond anyways and was released from jail. In the morning of January 19th, Markeith made his first appearance in court and was arraigned for his charges relating to the death of his ex-girlfriend, Sade Dixon. In this hearing, He cursed at the magistrate multiple times, accused the police of beating him, and requested to represent himself in this case. Markeith was denied bond, and a not guilty plea was set on his behalf. Hours after this hearing, the evidence and criminal probe of the Walmart shooting case came in. This meant that the prosecution was finally able to gather it together and submit the case to a grand jury as they had planned. Also on this day, the home eviction against Markeith was approved due to the incarceration. His fiends were taken out of the home and put into storage. The following morning, he was brought back to court, this time for the other case regarding the Deborah Clayton death, the officer whom he shot at the Walmart. In this hearing, he asked the judge for her name several times and even denied being Markeith Loyd. He was ordered to be held without bond in this case as well, and the prosecution would agree to submit the evidence to a grand jury in order to have him face more severe charges. Markeith was shortly after tied to another criminal probe regarding the woman whom he had threatened in August of that year. This woman had recognized Markeith Loyd on the news and then informed law enforcement that he was a suspect who had threatened her. The county's DA's office would take on the case and review it. Markeith was then charged with a misdemeanor for having resisted arrest. He was brought to court on the 25th of January for this separate case. His bond for the misdemeanor was set to $500, and a not guilty plea was set for him. In this hearing, he also shouted in the courtroom and cursed at the magistrate. The following day, Markeith was ruled competent to represent himself. He was then indicted and charged with 3 charges of aggravated assault with a firearm, all felonies. At first, he refused to appear in court. This led the hearing to be postponed to the next day, January 29th. In this hearing, no bond was set for Markeith, and a not guilty plea was also set on his behalf. This was surprisingly a fast and calm hearing. The county's DA's office then announced that they did not plan on presenting the cases against those who supposedly aided Loyd to a grand jury, and promised to have no other charges be filed against them because they were not in that much trouble. Markeith's incarcerated ex, Jamie Slaughter's appeal to have an affordable bond was approved, and it was changed to $20,000. She then posted the bond and was released from jail. While incarcerated that year, Markeith was ordered to go to court for 3 different traffic cases, infractions which had been committed in 2017 prior to his last arrest. They were for running red lights on 3 different occasions. No plea was ever set, and Markeith was fined a total of $855. Due to his incarceration, there was never a court hearing set for these cases, and Markeith was excused from paying the fines. The system only cared that Markeith's final driving offenses had been brought to light. That year, a day after Valentine's Day, a grand jury indicted Markeith Loyd on charges for the crimes he committed the day of the Walmart incident. The indicted charges were 1 count of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted first-degree murder, 1 count of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, 1 count of carjacking of a firearm, and 1 count of illegal firearms possession. On the 22nd of February, Markeith appeared in court on these charges. He was informed that this indictment was due to all of the violent incidents that occurred on the 9th of January. Being Officer Deborah Clayton dying, another officer nearly being shot, a civilian being threatened, and having their car stolen. After this hearing, the Orange County DA's office declared that they would charge Markeith with no additional crimes moving forward. Days later, on March 1st, a not guilty plea was set on Markeith's behalf for this new indictment. Then on the 16th, Florida State Attorney Aramis Ayala announced that she would not seek the death penalty for Markeith's homicide cases. Florida's governor, Rick Scott, disagreed with her politically biased decision and requested that attorney Ayala withdraw from prosecuting the cases. Ayala refused to leave the cases, which led to Governor Scott issuing an executive order which got her kicked out of them. Scott claimed that the families of the victims deserve to have a prosecutor in the case who will aggressively prosecute Markeith Loyd to the fullest extent of the law and bring him to justice. Florida's Marion County DA, Brad Keene, was assigned to replace her and prosecute the case instead. On March 20th, 2017, a status hearing was held. It was confirmed that evidence had been entered in Markeith's case. Attorney Ayala was furious at the governor for removing her, so she showed up to court and filed motions to have her be allowed to prosecute again. The judge had her wait until the end of the hearing to continue on with no interruptions and deal with this unexpected drama afterwards. The court date for Ayala's motions was scheduled for 8 days later in order to give them time to plan things out. Markeith changed his mind about representing himself and requested to have a public defender represent him instead. He asked for Miami attorney Terrence Lebanon, who was Florida's highest paid capital litigation lawyer. The judge promised to deal with this request later and even scheduled a hearing to decide whether Markeith should be allowed to choose his own lawyer. On the 28th of March, the judge rejected Ayala's motions that had been filed out of fury and confirmed that the new prosecutor would be Brad Keene. In this hearing, Markeith spoke out and said that Brad Keene seeks revenge, not justice. On April 3rd of that year, a hearing was scheduled for the 12th to decide whether Markeith was allowed to choose his lawyer or not. When this day came, the judge rejected Markeith's request to appoint attorney Lebanon as his public defender. But another attorney who Markeith did like was offered to him. This was Roger Weidman. Markeith agreed to have Weidman be his attorney. This helped prevent more potential courtroom drama. There was a chance to have Markeith be tried in May 1st of that year for Sade Dixon's death, but due to him having waived a speedy trial, it was delayed and plans were changed. Later in April, the Orlando City Attorney's Office dropped Markeith's misdemeanor for resisting arrest. They chose to no longer prosecute it because Markeith was already facing other more severe charges, and they would rather focus on other people's cases instead. The following month, the Orange County DA's office dropped the charges from Markeith's case regarding his crimes back in August. They believed that due to the victim identifying Markeith as a suspect who threatened her just by a picture of him on the news, they were not granted a fair prosecution. Then in August, Markeith's ex-wife, whom he had filed for divorce for, accepted the divorce. Therefore, there was no need to set a court date for that, and they were now declared a separated couple. Attorney Brad Smith announced that the death penalty would be sought for Markeith Loyd in both of his capital homicide cases. Markeith was psychiatrically evaluated in jail and diagnosed with several mental conditions. The diagnosed conditions were PTSD, paranoia, schizophrenia, and traumatic brain injuries, which were most likely caused by his father's abuse growing up. Markeith's defense attorney then requested that they be allowed to seek an insanity plea in both cases. These insanity defenses were accepted, and Markeith's plea in the two homicide cases would be changed. Due to him having pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, if a jury found him insane, he would go to a mental institution instead of prison. Later on, the charges against the three people accused of aiding him were dropped. This was because investigators did not think there was enough evidence to have them as suspects. Jamie Slaughter, Lakencia Smith Lloyd, and Zarhi Mayan were not able to be convicted and were set free. That is why these investigators asked the county DA's office to let them go and just prosecute Markeith. In jail, Markeith would reunite with his son, Junior, whom would be called Lil Keith. This would be only temporary though. Junior faced 3 crime cases. In one of those cases, he was found not guilty by reason of insanity after a jury trial in 2018. After this verdict, the Orange County District Judge, Alicia Lattimore, approved the insanity defense for his 2 other cases and dismissed him from any further criminal prosecution. Junior was then transported from jail to a mental institution in Gainesville, Florida, known as the Gainesville Service Center, where he remains to this day. Also in 2018, Markeith complained about feeling isolated in jail, barely being able to be with the general population nor the jail's Christian program. This was deteriorating his mental health, which led him to seeking legal counsel and having a civil lawsuit be filed. The lawsuit targeted the state of Florida and the jail's warden, Cornita Riley. However, his requests were denied on June 17, 2019, nearly a year later, due to the nature of his violent crimes, and the lawsuit against both defendants was dismissed. Before that rejection, in May 2019, another civil lawsuit was filed on behalf of Markeith, which targeted Florida's former governor, Rick Scott, and current governor, Ron DeSantis. This suit claimed that Governor Scott did not allow Orange County DA Attorney Ayala to prosecute Markeith just because she had refused to seek the death penalty against him in both homicide cases. It also accused Governor DeSantis of allowing that restriction to continue. This made the situation sound as if both politicians were working together to put Markeith to death. The suit against the governors was also denied and dismissed a little over 2 months later on July 23rd, because the crimes Markeith was accused of were grave, which made the court believe that under those circumstances, Ayala should have chosen to move forward with the death penalty. Then, nearly a month after that, the decision would be appealed. Now, let me say, Attorney Ayala is the county's DA. She has the right to choose not to seek the death penalty against a mentally ill person. Who are Governors Scott and DeSantis to overrule and try to put an ill black man to death? Crazy how both lawsuits were rejected. Who's making those decisions? Another Neil Gupta? By the way, let me tell you who Neil Gupta is. He worked at a school district that I once attended. He would defend staff members who would do wrong and said he did not find evidence of wrongdoing. All this talk just to keep them working. Anyways, let's get back on topic. August 20th, 2019 was when the appeal for this lawsuit was filed. Markeith would be put on his first murder trial while awaiting a decision. On September 27th, 2019, jury selection began in the trial of Markeith Loyd for killing his ex-girlfriend, Sade Dixon. It took several days to select the jury. They had started on the 27th, took a break for that weekend, and resumed on the 30th. They took another weekend break, and then resumed on the 7th of October until they seated the jury days later on the 10th. The prosecution chose to drop Markeith's felony gun possession charge in order to let the jury deliberate the case more easily. The following day, on the 11th, opening arguments were made by both parties. The prosecution detailed the crimes and described Loyd as a cold-blooded killer who unnecessarily showed up to Dixon's house. They claimed that he killed Dixon out of anger when they had argued. and then injured her brother who had come out to protect her, tried to injure the other brother, and cause the death of their unborn baby. They described how Sade Dixon was pregnant and how her dying led to the unborn baby dying as well. The defense spoke, claiming that Dixon said mean fiends to Markeith for a while, upon realizing that he had a wife already while they dated. The defense claims that Markeith suffered from delusions, mental health issues, and started feeling threatened by Dixon, which led him to impulsively, uncontrollably killing her. They claimed that Dixon egged Markeith, and that her brother Ronald Stewart went after him. It was also mentioned that when Dixon had argued with Markeith, she had him wait outside, went back into the house, and grabbed a gun, which is the one she pulled out at Markeith. The prosecution withdrew the one charge of illegal firearms possession in this case to ensure that the jury would have an easier time reaching a verdict due to all the drama that went on that I've just been discussing. Once the opening arguments were over, it was time to interview witnesses. When they finished their lunchtime, the parties could finally start calling these witnesses. Dixon's parents' neighbor testified on how she heard screaming outside, then saw two bodies on the ground when she took a peek of what had occurred. Those were the bodies of Sade Dixon and her brother Ronald Stewart. Orange County Deputy Rachel Magura, who responded to the shooting of Sade Dixon, took the stand, claiming that she saw Dixon and Ronald Stewart on the ground injured. She had tried to provide aid to Dixon, who was closest to her, but Dixon died at the scene. The body cam video of Deputy Magura was shown in court. The scene where she provided aid to Sade Dixon. One of the county's detectives, Wesley Avent, testified that he collected bullet shells at the crime scene. These shells were later identified as ones that came out of Markeith's gun. Another detective from the same agency, Andrew Harrison, concluded that Dixon and Stewart had been shot multiple times because they had several wounds on their bodies. Detective Harrison picked up Dixon's gun and found that there were no bullets inside, which meant that she would not have been able to kill Markeith with it. The trial was delayed for moments on its first day because the judge and attorneys had to solve an issue with one of the jurors. It appears that one of the jurors lied about their job status on their paperwork, so a complaint was made. This juror was removed from the trial, replaced with someone else, and sent home. After this move was done, the trial would be able to continue. Dixon's brother, Ronald Stewart Jr., who was shot and injured by Markeith Loyd, took the stand. Stewart claimed that Markeith tried to start arguing with Dixon, and that he then pulled a gun at him when he headed outside to see what was going on. Stewart also claimed that when the gun was being pointed at him, he put his hands up in the air. More information was unveiled with Stewart's testimony. Dixon's family did not like Markeith, and she claimed that he would not be allowed to see their baby once it was born. Dixon pulled a gun at Markeith and then dropped it as Markeith pulled out two guns. The gun Markeith tried to shoot with did not fire. Stewart afterwards tackled Markeith. Markeith then started shooting repeatedly. Tracy Anderson, a court reporter who worked at one of the hearings in this case, which had been held on August 13, 2019, mentioned comments that Markeith made during that hearing. The comments were, "It wasn't my fault," and her brother, "No, I know," and he came out. I told him we were straight. She told him we were straight. She didn't even ask you for your help. She done pulled the gun on me already. I took her gun. I don't understand why reporter Anderson testified. She wasn't a witness of the crime, and the comments a mentally ill person makes in court is not even the case's trial, should absolutely not be mentioned to a jury. The next to testify was Dixon's mother, Stephanie. She claimed that she called Markeith a 40-year-old B-word. She actually said the word. And pedophile. Stephanie did not want Markeith over at their home and really disapproved of his relationship with her daughter, Sade Dixon. She described how when she heard gunshots, she tried to go outside of her son, Dominique, to see what was going on, but her other son, Ronald, pushed her inside to dodge her from more shots that Markeith was firing. She and Dominique were almost injured on that day. Dominique testified after his mother, who was 19 when the shooting occurred. He claimed that when he got back home from playing basketball in a park, he saw his sister Sade Dixon and Markeith Loyd arguing. Dominique asked them if everything was okay. Markeith replied, "Yeah, everything okay." Dominique then went inside the home. He also claimed that Markeith fled the scene. He went back inside the home and told his dad to get their household shotgun in case Markeith came back. Father Ron described what happened on the night of December 13th, 2016, and claimed that he was unaware Dixon had a gun with her at the moment. He was confused on the night of the shooting and thought the gunshot noises he heard were firecrackers because the holiday season was on its way. Ron didn't realize they were gunshots since he heard his wife freaking out about their two children being injured and his grandson, Sade Dixon's son, who was about 2 years old, say Uncle Ronald was shot, referring to Dixon's brother, Ronald Stewart Jr. The court then adjourned for the day and will continue on with day 2 of the trial on the following Saturday. On this Saturday, on the start of day 2, there was another issue with the jury. Another one of their members had been accused of lying on their paperwork. Therefore, this juror was removed from the trial, and sent home. The two removed jurors in this trial had lied about their employment somewhere on the paperwork they had filled out. After this issue was resolved, the trial could once again continue. A woman who had been shopping at the Walmart where Markeith was believed to have shot another police officer testified that she was one of the people who recognized Markeith as a wanted suspect and informed this other officer. She got on the ground that day when she saw this officer take out her gun and Markeith also take out a gun that he had. She then knew there would be a shooting in front of her. It looks like the prosecution called this witness to describe how much of a cold-blooded killer Markeith was, but this Walmart shooting had nothing to do with the killing of Sade Dixon, so I don't get why it was appropriate to call this woman to the stand in this trial. A Walmart employee whom was in charge of clearing out the store's parking lot testified what he saw on the day of the Walmart shooting, claiming that he witnessed this officer, Deborah Clayton, chasing Markeith Loyd with her gun, not even a taser, a gun, yelling, asking Markeith to stop running. This employee also claimed that Markeith had been wearing a black security shirt, which was believed to have been in his uniform from a job he worked at a nightclub. Again, the Walmart shooting had nothing to do with this trial. These witnesses should have been saved for Markeith's next trial. I know Markeith probably wore a security shirt to not seem like a criminal to the public, but there was no need to call a Walmart employee to the stand in this trial. Crime scene investigator Karen Livingood, who responded to the Walmart shooting, testified that she found bullet shells in the parking lot, which were later identified as the ones from Markeith's gun. None of them came from Officer Clayton's gun. Orange County Sheriff's Office Detective Chuck Ashworth took the stand next. He was in the office's fugitive unit and worked with the U.S. Marshals in this case. Detective Ashworth claimed that he was the second law enforcement officer that arrived at the abandoned house where Markeith was captured. He claimed that Markeith threw a gun out of the house's back door and then came out to surrender to law enforcement. This was the gun Markeith was believed to have used in both shootings that he was wanted for. Having these witnesses called to testify was a plus for Markeith because he never mentioned anything about Markeith resisting arrest. Through this testimony, it seemed that Markeith was fully compliant. City of Orlando crime scene investigator Edward Vanderberg then took the stand. He claimed that he identified the thrown gun as a .40 caliber pistol, which he collected, and identified its owner as Markeith Loyd. Crime lab analyst Richard Roof testified that this pistol, which Markeith threw out of the abandoned house, was the one that shot the bullets which left shells behind in front of the home where Sadie Dixon died, and in front of the Walmart where Deborah Clayton died. This was proved through a matching of the collected evidence from the crime scenes. Dr. Sarah Zajdowicz from the Orlando Medical Examiner's Office was in charge of conducting Sadie Dixon's autopsy. She established her cause of death as a murder and testified that the bullets which struck Dixon led to her death. She also concluded that Dixon's tragic passing also caused the death of her unborn baby. Orange County Sheriff's Office Detective Brian Savelli from the Homicide Unit investigated Sadie Dixon's phone and believed that Markeith called her before she was shot, which had led her to go outside and meet him. Detective Savelli was concerned about several texts sent by Markeith, which ranged from December 10, 2016. There was lots of conflict within the messages. Savelli also obtained a police report claiming that Markeith had suffered a robbery while working at his place, the New Texas Chicken Restaurant. The charges against Markeith's attacker were unfortunately dropped by the district attorney's office. This robbery had seemed to have stressed and traumatized Markeith. Then Orlando Police Department homicide detective Shane Overfield testified that he found a bullet shell outside the apartment complex where Markeith almost shot an officer who had been following him after the Walmart shooting. Licensed private investigator Patrick McKenna, who was hired by Markeith's defense attorney, took the stand next, claiming that he visited the crime scenes in Markeith's cases. McKenna walked the jury through the surveillance footage of Markeith Loyd and Officer Deborah Clayton at the Walmart. Both seemed to have been calmly shopping, and there was really no conflict inside the Walmart. That conflict on that day seemed to have been caused due to Officer Clayton chasing Markeith in the store's parking lot. Markeith was believed to have shot Clayton out of fear. Another private investigator, Anna Marie Cox, whom Markeith's defense also hired, testified as well. She claimed that she examined the Walmart's building and found a defect which seemed to have been caused by a bullet that Markeith had shot. This defect made Cox believe that if Markeith was the shooter, he really had no control of the gun and did not intend to kill somebody in such a cold-blooded way. Florida forensic computer scientist John Sawicki testified that he extracted data from Sadie Dixon's phone. Sawicki claimed that Sadie Dixon took screenshots of Markeith's Facebook page. These screenshots proved that Dixon had access to Markeith's Facebook account. In this data, Dixon seemed to have been digitally stalking Markeith by looking through his messages and phone calls to see who he was having contact with. She was most likely on the lookout in case Markeith was cheating on her. Lastly, Markeith's cousin, Glenn McCree, testified in this trial. Glenn claimed that Markeith had issues with one of his ex-wives because he did not like her habit of smoking weed. Markeith had this same issue with Sade Dixon, and their relationship became pretty stressful. He as well started normally possessing 2 guns after he suffered a robbery. Markeith then testified on his behalf, describing his relationship with his ex-girlfriend, Sade Dixon. He claimed that he first divorced his ex-wife because she had a hard time quitting cigarettes, and that he found it hard to breathe when somebody smoked them. He also described how Sade Dixon would smoke while pregnant with their baby. Markeith as well described life growing up, how he suffered from PTSD, bipolar disorder, and psychosis. He recounted memories of racism he faced growing up as a black kid. There was a group of KKK members who would hunt down black people like him and attack them. Markeith also had bad experiences with police officers in his youth. He also believed Dixon's mother was disrespectful, but he still respected her. It looks like Dixon's mother did not want her dating Markeith because of their big age difference. This testimony brought to light feelings of Markeith inside him. Between Markeith's testimony, the judge had to address yet another issue with the jury. One of the jury members snitched on another member, describing that this other juror was discussing Florida's gun laws of a deputy at a hotel where the jury would be picked up at and be transported to the courthouse, since it was a high-profile case. This snitching juror was an alternate who claimed that the conversation they heard with the deputy would influence the decision to deliberate a fair verdict. The other juror talking to the deputy was allowed to stay as they explained that the conversation was not about the case. It was about an application they had filed for concealed carry of a personal firearm. This juror was only an alternate. The judge removed them, and none of the parties were affected because alternate jurors only listen and deliberate on a verdict if they need to replace one of the main jurors. This jury issue was not a big deal either way, because the trial was almost over anyways. Markeith had been interrupted with this situation and had to continue his testimony the following day. The following day, Markeith claimed that while on the run, he did want to turn himself into a 40s eventually, but would only do it safely. He started wanting to turn himself in several hours after the Walmart shooting. Markeith did not want his son, Junior, around Sade Dixon because Junior had asthma, and Dixon's smoking could have affected Junior's health. The parties then rested their cases and would wait until the judge approved them after a quick review. Before letting the judge review the cases, the prosecution requested a rebuttal witness, the lead investigator in the Walmart shooting, in order to discuss more surveillance videos from the store. Markeith's defense disagreed with having this investigator be called to the stand, because they did not believe it was necessary and thought that the testimony would be unfair. The judge ruled that this extra witness would not be allowed to testify, and the video of the Walmart shooting could not be shown to the jury in order to keep this a fair trial. The cases of both parties were then approved and almost ready for the jury to deliberate on. The judge and attorneys all together wrote the jury's instructions. The next step in the trial was its closing arguments. The prosecution described the crime that had occurred and how Markeith inappropriately showed up to the home of Sade Dixon's parents. They blamed Markeith for the death of Dixon, her unborn baby, the injuries of her brother, and how her parents were almost harmed as well. They believed that since Dixon had already dropped her gun, Markeith had no reason to shoot the way he did. Then the defense claimed that Markeith suffered from delusions, which led him to show up at the house that night, and then Dixon approached him disrespectfully in a fretful manner. Dixon had said mean things to Markeith throughout their relationship, and so had her family. He had been traumatized from a robbery, and could not control himself when operating a gun, but he kept his handguns for safety. Markeith felt unsafe at Dixon's parents' house because she had brought a gun outside. He also felt threatened by her brother. The defense asked the jury to find Markeith not guilty by reason of insanity because he could not control his actions due to the various scenarios that had occurred. The prosecution then held a rebuttal closing argument, claiming that Sade Dixon brought a gun outside to scare Markeith away, and that her brother confronted Markeith because he felt him and his family were in danger. The prosecution described Markeith as a killer who escalated conflict and knew what he was doing. The judge then read the instructions and the jury would start deliberating a verdict. During the deliberations, Markeith complained about the prosecution, claiming that they accused him of phrases he did not say after shooting Dixon. The main phrase was "what the F." He actually said the word. Markeith also claimed that the prosecution lied about his movements during the shooting. Then on October 16, 2019, Markeith Loyd was convicted of all the charges that the jury had deliberated on. It was then time to continue on for the next phase of the trial, the sentencing, a phase which the jury would decide whether Markeith got the death penalty or not. After a 5-day break, Markeith, the jurors, judge, and attorneys were back for the penalty phase. The judge explained to the jury in the next set of instructions that their role was no longer deciding whether Markeith was guilty or not. It was now to decide whether he deserves to be sentenced to death. The jury would deliberate only on 2 charges, the capital offenses, the first-degree murder of Sade Dixon and the killing of their unborn child. Either one of those could have landed him immediately on death row. In the short opening statement of the prosecution during this penalty phase, the criminal record of Markeith was mentioned, as well as how violent he behaved in those incidents. I don't get how these other incidents, most of them being old, have anything to do with the Sade Dixon case. What a way of biasing the jury. Markeith's defense claimed that due to his mental state, the racism he experienced in life affected him more than how it should have. He had a messy background, selling drugs since age 13, having too much responsibility for his siblings, and getting kicked out of school, which led him to having to get his GED. The first witness to testify in this penalty phase was Markeith's probation officer. This probation officer claimed that Markeith was unable to work jobs during his supervised release after being released from federal prison for assaulting an officer in 1998. There were misconduct complaints mentioned that occurred while Markeith was on probation, such as him testing positive for marijuana and failing to report a traffic incident to anyone in the probation office. Then a fingerprint examiner who worked on Markeith Loyd's case testified, describing how many times he had been arrested in his life. This concluded that he had been in trouble with the law several times. Then Todd Herb, the Orlando police officer, whom Markeith was accused of assaulting in 1998, took the stand, claiming that he pulled Markeith over on that day in the 90s because the car he was driving had no tag on it. Markeith pulled over, got out of the car, and started walking away. Officer Herb informed Markeith that he had to see his driver's license. Markeith said he wasn't driving and started running away. Herb then informed Markeith that he would be arrested for resisting without violence and grabbed his wrist. When Herb grabbed his wrist, he started saying that his wrist hurt. Herb then tried to put Markeith in handcuffs. Markeith punched the officer in the face and took off running. Herb was able to eventually detain Markeith until backup officers arrived to finish arresting him. Herb did admit that Markeith had shown no signs of committing any crimes. That includes drug dealing. However, due to him not complying with Herb, his prior criminal activity leading up to those moments had been brought to light. Herb also shared that he found out Markeith had an injury on his wrist, but he found out too late after the arrest had been made. Markeith's mother, Patricia, took the stand and discussed his life growing up. She started with talking about his birth in South Dakota. She claimed that she split up from Markeith's father, Robert, because he was violent. Patricia recounted one incident in which Robert was going to a nightclub with friends and how he didn't want her to go. Patricia said that if he didn't want her to go, she could just stay home. Robert then slapped her. Robert was in the Air Force on a base in which he was stationed at. He hit Patricia in the eye, and she had to go to the hospital. She chose not to press charges. She continued discussing Robert's abuse towards her and her family. Patricia as well shared when she found out Markeith was selling drugs. She made him get a mental evaluation. She did describe positive things about Markeith, such as how he sang in their church's choir as a little kid. Patricia did explain that Markeith had an injury when he was arrested for assaulting a police officer. He had a big cut in his hand and would wear a cast for part of the day and then take it off. Prison really messed him up. He feared his life. These thoughts would haunt him for the years to come. The next ones to testify were Markeith's 4 siblings. They each took the stand individually, one after another. They all claimed that they were alone at home most of the time as little kids, and they went to bed hungry most night. They described how Markeith was the one feeding them, and that he would be out in the streets a lot. This meant that thanks to his drug dealing, the siblings could eat. The siblings also described the robbery Markeith experienced and the racism, which really affected him mentally. One of Markeith's friends testified on how they met while playing football together at the age of 12. They grew a close friendship and hung out a lot. This friend described Markeith as a hard player in their football team who played that hard due to him growing up without a father. He played a linebacker and a defensive end. The father also claimed that he moved in with Markeith's family after getting kicked out of his grandma's house. He described Markeith as a good person who took care of his mother. He really seemed like a positive person until his mental health issues started affecting him deeply. This friend mentioned that when Markeith was out on the streets, he was usually selling drugs to support his family. He also spoke about Markeith being kidnapped at one point when he was taken to an apartment at gunpoint and beaten up. They had tried to rob him. Another friend of Markeith testified about his arrest in 1998, describing how the police investigated him and searched his drug house. The friend claimed that he sold drugs with Markeith because where they lived, there were 2 options for young people: rob or sell drugs. This friend also mentioned that Markeith was robbed and it affected him mentally, leading to him normally carrying a gun to feel safer. He claimed to have also gotten in trouble with the law during the 1998 police raid in Markeith's home. The drugs were apparently his cousin's, Eric Dorsey. Eric chose to keep the drugs at Markeith's home instead because he had a brother who would steal them from his place. When the police raided the home, Eric and the testifying friend were arrested. Markeith got into legal trouble for this as well. He was already in jail for the assault on a police officer. However, Markeith was the one who went to prison for this. Drugs that were not even his. Eric was next to testify. He admitted that the drugs that sent Markeith to federal prison were his. Eric went to federal prison as well for those drugs. Florida pastor Jesse McCree took the stand. He is also Markeith's cousin. McCree claimed that Markeith got his cousins and siblings things that they needed growing up. He made money by selling drugs and would tell them not to do the things he did. Pastor McCree also spoke about Markeith's son, Junior, whom he called Lil Keith. McCree admitted that Junior was in a mental institution, but did not know his diagnosis. He also discussed what he noticed when visiting Markeith at a halfway house, weeks before he was released after serving his federal prison sentence. Markeith's belief system changed. He feared people wanting to kill him and wanted to turn his life around. One of his family friends testified, claiming that Markeith would ask him to buy the family necessities while he was imprisoned. Despite being locked up, he still cared about his mother and siblings' well-being. Florida psychologist Marvin Dunn, who worked in Markeith's school district, testified that the school system failed him. They failed to identify and treat his mental health issues in time. Neuropsychologist Joseph Sesta described how Markeith had several head injuries from being beaten as an infant. When he got older during his kidnapping, which caused psychiatric problems. Another psychologist, James Campbell, claimed that Markeith did not have an easy life growing up. At 7 years old, there was a day when he opened the fridge and cabinets. There was no food inside, which led to him to go out and shoplift at groceries. His mother was barely available growing up and normally not home. She would as well beat her kids with belts, switches, or branches, and extension cords until they cried. This was done as a punishment when they would misbehave. Raising kids like this may result in them expressing aggressive behaviors. It breaks my heart to know this about Markeith. I know why he would want to shoplift, and I cannot blame him for that. His mother's way of punishing her children was very cruel, and that's how many of my family members were raised. You don't know how negatively conservative many of my family members came out, and the challenges they have faced. For example, in my family, if you are born into a boy body, you are a boy, trans lives don't matter, and you will not paint your nails, wear makeup, nor skirts. Life growing up has been difficult for me, and I depend on friends to stay positive. I would like my great-grandparents, the most abusive ancestors I know, to be aware of the issues and pain they have caused. Another cousin of Markeith testified next, claiming that he became more paranoid after being kidnapped, had bad headaches, and would no longer trust people. Psychiatrist Michael Maher claimed that Markeith was fighting with thought disorder, as during evaluations, he would always try to bring up racism and change the topic to that. It was hard to communicate with Markeith because he would constantly question Dr. Maher. Markeith's daughter, Kiana, testified that she was very close to her dad, more than her mother, and that her dad showed her lots of love. He was also very close to Kiana's daughter, his granddaughter, and despite struggling, he would still love and care for his family. A rebuttal witness, psychologist Greg Pritchard, then testified that he did not notice any symptoms in Markeith that would be considered psychotic, which meant that Dr. Pritchard believed Markeith was aware of his actions. It sounds like Pritchard questioned, is Markeith psychotic, or is he just black? I could sense the energy of Dr. Pritchard and him thinking, you struggle mentally, shame on you. In my experience, I have known people like that and grew up with them for a big part of my life. I've got to say, don't shame me, shame on you. You initiated this conflict, loser. I would not seriously consider Pritchard's testimony in this trial. Both parties then rested their cases, and it was time to move on to the next phase of the trial. The judge and attorneys then discussed the cases in order to write out jury instructions. After the instructions were written, the judge read them aloud to the jurors. It was then time for another set of closing arguments. The prosecution claimed that Markeith intended to be violent the night he killed Sade Dixon, and that he knew this violence would also cause the death of their unborn baby inside her. The prosecution also mentioned that Markeith tried to kill her brother, Ronald Stewart, her mother, Stephanie, and her other brother, Dominique. Therefore, he deserved to be sentenced to death, because chaos is what he wanted to cause that night, and that is how the prosecution described things. Well, the penalty phase of this trial is only regarding Sade Dixon and the unborn baby, not Ronald, Stephanie, or Dominique. That is irrelevant at this point. And of course, a mentally ill person is capable of causing chaos. Those descriptions are not good arguments. The defense then claimed to the jury that Markeith was not raised in a healthy environment and that difficult events in which he had lived through led him to making choices that would get him in trouble with the law. They claimed to the jury that due to Markeith's mental state, he does not deserve to be put to death, and that would not be a fair punishment. After closing arguments, the case was sent to the jury for deliberations. On October 23rd, 2019, hours after those closing arguments, the jury reached a verdict. At first, Markeith waived his right to be present while it was read, but would shortly after change his mind. The jury chose not to recommend the death penalty for Markeith Loyd in this case. He was immediately sentenced after the verdict was read: life in prison without parole for killing Sade Dixon, life without parole for causing the death of their unborn baby, life with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years for the attempted murder of her brother Ronald Stewart, life with the possibility of parole after serving 20 years for endangering her mother, Stephanie Dixon Daniels. Life with the possibility of parole after serving 20 years in prison for endangering her brother, Dominique Daniels. District Judge Leticia Marquez ordered each count to be served consecutively to one another. She refused to toss his conviction nor redo the trial. There could also be no resentencing because due to Markeith being convicted of a capital murder, the sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole was mandatory. Markeith would remain in the Orange County Jail to await trial for his next case, the murder of Officer Deborah Clayton, whom he shot at the Walmart. He appealed the Sade Dixon case and seek to have another trial. This appeal remains pending to this day. The life sentence would stay as such because this was a capital case, and prosecutors in Florida are not allowed to appeal a jury's decision on whether someone is sentenced to death or not. On July 20th, 2020, Markeith's appeal to reinstate the lawsuit against the governors was denied. In 2021, Markeith was put on trial for the Walmart shooting. Several failed efforts had been made to take the death penalty off the table, in this case as well. It took about 12 days to select this next jury. Doing so was complicated and involved lots of drama within the courtroom. Prosecutor Ryan Williams, in his opening argument, described Markeith as having been nervous at the Walmart where Deborah Clayton died. He had been nervous because he knew there was a police officer in the store, and he knew he was a high-profile, wanted man. Markeith's defense attorney, the same one that had represented him in his previous trial, told the jury that the shooting was not his fault because he had been suffering from paranoid delusions. The first witness to testify was Detective Brian Savello from the Orange County Sheriff's Office. He described how the whole office, as well as the other city law enforcement agencies, hunted down Markeith Loyd to take him into custody for killing his girlfriend, Sade Dixon. Takesha Bryant, a shopper at Walmart, the day Lieutenant Deborah Clayton died, described how she recognized Markeith and informed the store's management that they had a fugitive in their building. Then Timothy Stevens, who was working as an asset protection manager, for a store described how he radioed an announcement through the workers' walkie-talkies, informing them about the intense situation. As an asset protection manager, he was basically the store's head of security. Walmart employee Julia Johnson then continued on to describe what happened that day. She claimed that she was made aware about the announcement of a fugitive being inside the store, and that she had spotted Markeith Loyd. Therefore, she told Lieutenant Deborah Clayton, the only police officer in the store, that there was a wanted murder suspect inside and about to check out and leave. Another Walmart worker, Monica Pritgion, testified how she witnessed Markeith Loyd running away from Clayton, then shooting her. Pritgion had called the cops in order for Clayton to be assisted. Markeith had fled at this point. After this intense set of testimony, there was a lunch break. The parties ate calmly as if nothing ever happened. Then, after the lunch break, it was 911 dispatcher Patrina Monahan's turn to speak. She described the chaotic aftermath of this shooting. This was one of the very few super intense GTA-style crime events in Florida's history. Next, Sergeant Peter Cadiz, the lead homicide detective from the Orlando Police Department at the time of Clayton's shooting, took the stand to recount the events that occurred that morning at Walmart. The state-called Orlando Police Department patrol officer Brandon Fortin to the stand. Clayton was his parole supervisor on the day she was shot and killed. The state asked him about the events that took place on the day Clayton was killed. The state called Orange County Sheriff's Office's Captain Joseph Carter to the stand. He testified that he was on his way to work when he heard the dispatch requesting help at the Walmart where Clayton was shot and killed. Carter explained that he decided to head to the Walmart to assist, but changed his course after hearing a signal reporting the suspect's direction of travel while driving south of North Pine Hills Road. He said he spotted a vehicle matching the description of the suspect's vehicle. Orange County Sheriff's Office Captain Joseph Carter testified that he followed the vehicle he believed was driven by the suspect, Markeith Loyd, into an apartment complex. Carter said that as he got out of his car to confront the suspect, Loyd fired 2 shots at him, prompting Carter to quickly retreat back into his vehicle. After the shots were fired, Carter stated that the suspect fled on foot and he did not see him again. The state called a man who lived in Royal Oaks, the apartment complex where a deputy testified he lost track of Markeith Loyd on the day Clayton was killed. The man recalled hearing someone speak to him as he walked toward his apartment building. As he began to ascend the stairs, he said a man matching Loyd's description pointed a gun at his face and demanded his car keys. "I took the keys and threw them in the air," he said, before running to his apartment. He said, "I took the keys and threw them in the air." He then claimed that he ran to his apartment. The man stated that the suspect drove off in his car. The state called its final witness of the day, Sean Williams, a forensic video analyst for the Orlando Police Department. Williams testified that he responded to the Walmart where Clayton was shot and killed, as well as the apartment complex where Loyd is accused of shooting an officer, to collect video evidence from both locations. Then the intense day in court concluded, but the jury would be back the following morning to continue with the dramatic trial. The next day of the trial was more informative and less dramatic. Crime scene investigator Stacy Monroe testified about the investigation into a carjacking connected to Loyd's attempt to escape. Monroe explained how she collected evidence at the scene, including documenting tire marks, photographing damage to fences, and retrieving items like a black t-shirt with a security logo and camouflage pants found on a rear patio during a search. This testimony helped build a timeline and evidence trail linking Loyd to various crimes while he was trying to evade capture after shooting Lieutenant Clayton. The next witness, Detective Peter Cadiz, a 21-year veteran with the Orlando Police Department, was the lead investigator in the case involving the shooting of Lieutenant Deborah Clayton. On the day of the incident, he was one of the first to review the Walmart surveillance footage, which provided crucial details about how the events leading up to Clayton's death unfolded. During his testimony, Cadiz spoke about the strong emotions he felt after learning of Clayton's death, describing her as a longtime friend. He admitted that his personal connection with her influenced his actions during the investigation. Cadiz also addressed the circumstances surrounding the arrest of Markeith Loyd, including the injuries he sustained. He described the events of January 17, 2017, when Loyd was captured after an extensive manhunt, and discussed the use of force involved in his arrest. Cadiz's testimony also played a key role in establishing the timeline of events and offering insight into the investigation following Lieutenant Clayton's tragic shooting. During the trial of Markeith Loyd for the murder of Lieutenant Deborah Clayton, a big testimony took place, the one of crime scene investigator Gary Crosby. He testified about his role in the investigation. He responded to the Brookside apartment complex, where he found a vehicle thought to be involved in a carjacking. While carrying out a search warrant at the complex, Crosby took photographs and collected items from a rear patio, including a black shirt with a security logo and camouflage pants. This evidence played a part in the large investigation linking Markeith Loyd to several crimes as he attempted to evade capture after shooting Lieutenant Clayton. The state called Orlando police officer Paul Foster to the stand. In January 2017, when Clayton was shot and killed, Foster was part of the K-9 unit. He explained his role in the search for Markeith Loyd that day. The state also called Charles Ashworth to the stand. In 2017, Ashworth worked with the Orange County Sheriff's Office's Violent Fugitive Apprehension Unit. He described what occurred when he and other deputies responded to the home on Lescott Lane, where Markeith was found days after Clayton was shot and killed. Yes, Deputy U.S. Marshal Cleveland Jenkins testified during the trial of Markeith Loyd for the murder of Lieutenant Deborah Clayton. This was also a big testimony in the case. He spoke about his role in the efforts to capture Markeith Loyd following Clayton's death. Jenkins explained the actions taken by law enforcement in the days after the shooting, including the search that eventually led to Markeith Loyd's capture. His testimony also helped build the timeline and details of the manhunt that followed the tragic event. During the trial of Markeith Loyd for the murder of Lieutenant Deborah Clayton, Dr. Joshua Stephanie, the medical examiner who performed Clayton's autopsy, testified about her injuries. He explained that Clayton suffered multiple gunshot wounds, including one that exited her body and ricocheted off concrete or her bulletproof vest, striking her in the back. Dr. Stephanie identified the gunshot wound to her neck as the fatal injury. During cross-examination, defense attorney Terrence Lenneman asked if Dr. Stephanie would be surprised if Clayton continued firing her weapon after being wounded. Dr. Stephanie responded that it would not be unexpected. He also mentioned signs of blunt force trauma and abrasions on Clayton's face and knees, which were consistent with a fall in the parking lot. He concluded that the cause of death was gunshot wounds and the manner of death was homicide. This testimony was important for helping the jury understand the extent of Clayton's injuries and the medical evidence surrounding her death. During the trial of Markeith Loyd for the murder of Lieutenant Deborah Clayton, retired crime scene investigator Karen Livingood testified about the collection and analysis of evidence from the crime scene at 1157 Lescott Lane. She explained how various items such as firearms, ammunition, a bulletproof vest, a cell phone battery, a knit cap, and personal belongings like a black sweatshirt were carefully recovered. Each item was separately packaged, sealed, and labeled to ensure proper documentation and forensic analysis. Livingood also discussed the fingerprint examination on the recovered firearms, confirming that the items were tested for fingerprints and that the results were used to further the investigation. During the cross-examination, the defense pointed out discrepancies in the number of photographs taken on January 9th and January 15th, questioning the accuracy and consistency of the photographic evidence. Livingood responded by explaining that she was instructed by Detective Kiddis to take additional photos on January 15th to capture more evidence, showing that the investigative team worked together. She also clarified a confusion about the location of a strike mark initially thought to be on the wall but later confirmed to be on the ground, addressing concerns about the precision of the photos. Livingood's testimony was important to the case as the jury later requested for her testimony to be read back during deliberations, highlighting its significance. Overall, Livingood's testimony provided detailed insights into the evidence collection process and addressed challenges raised by the defense, reinforcing the integrity of the investigation. Detective Shane Overfield from the Orlando Police Department's Intelligence Unit, formerly with the Homicide Unit, testified during the trial of Markeith Loyd for the murder of Lieutenant Deborah Clayton. He described his response to the Walmart on January 9, 2017, after Clayton was shot, and explained the events that led to Loyd's escape and the ongoing investigation. During cross-examination, defense attorney Terrence Lenneman raised concerns about the possible sidebar conversation between Detective Overfield and another officer, suggesting it might have affected the trial. This led to a motion for a mistrial, although the judge addressed the issue without granting it. Additionally, forensic consultant Anna Mary Cox examined a defect on a window frame at Walmart and noted that it might be consistent with a projectile strike, but she stated that further analysis was needed to confirm the cause. Overall, Detective Overfield's testimony gave a valuable insight into the police response after the shooting, while the defense's cross-examination questioned the fairness of the proceedings. Dr. Zara Zaidowicz, the chief medical examiner, testified via Zoom during the trial of Markeith Loyd, who was accused of murdering Lieutenant Deborah Clayton. In her role as a medical examiner, Dr. Zydowicz is responsible for determining the cause and manner of death for individuals under her jurisdiction. She explained that the autopsy process, which includes both external and internal examinations, to accurately determine the cause of death. Dr. Zydowicz also discussed the role of a forensic pathology in examining injuries and wounds within a medical legal framework, emphasizing the importance of medical examiners in investigating deaths as required by state law. When it came to gunshot wounds, Dr. Zydowicz outlined how certain characteristics of the wounds can provide valuable information about the circumstances of the incident. She explained how medical examiners distinguish between entrance and exit wounds by analyzing the wounds and surrounding tissues. Her testimony played an important role in helping the jury understand the medical aspects of Lieutenant Clayton's death and the forensic evidence presented during the trial. During the trial of Markeith Loyd, crime scene investigator Ed Vanderberg testified about the evidence collected at the scene where Lieutenant Deborah Clayton was killed. He described finding shell casings, projectile fragments, and blood at the scene. Vanderberg specifically mentioned locating fired cartridge casings and a projectile fragment labeled as Marker 14. He highlighted the importance of properly collecting and documenting firearms-related evidence, including casings and projectiles, before sending them to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for testing. During the trial of Markeith Loyd, DNA analyst Sean Johnson testified about the DNA evidence collected from the crime scenes. His job was to analyze biological samples to identify DNA profiles that could link suspects to the crimes. Johnson processed samples from various items recovered during the investigation to establish connections between the evidence and individuals involved. Afterwards, the second day of testimony concluded. Obviously, the next day would be the third day with even more crucial information regarding this Walmart shooting. However, this third day was delayed due to violations committed during testimony the previous day. The violation was that during one of the testimony, Deputy Norman Lewis's name was mentioned, the deputy who died in an accident while chasing Markeith Loyd as he drove off. That was not allowed to be mentioned in this trial, nor the previous murder trial. Therefore, there were already clerical issues in the trial. Once the issues were settled, testimony could finally continue. During the trial of Markeith Loyd for the murder of Lieutenant Deborah Clayton, Lead Detective Peter Kaditz from the Orlando Police Department testified about his role in the investigation. With 21 years of experience in homicide cases, Detective Kaditz reviewed surveillance footage from the Walmart where the incident occurred and presented it to the court, helping the jury understand the events leading up to the shooting. On cross-examination, defense attorney Terry Lenemon questioned Detective Kaditz about the investigation procedures, including how wiretap authorizations were obtained. Kaditz provided explanations to clarify the investigative steps taken. Additionally, during the penalty phase of the trial, Detective Kaditz spoke about the circumstances surrounding Loyd's arrest, noting that the superficial injuries Loyd sustained, such as a swollen lip and a bruise under his right eye. He confirmed that Loyd's eye was not missing at the time of the arrest. Overall, Detective Kaditz's testimony was crucial in explaining the investigation and the events surrounding the tragic shooting of Lieutenant Clayton. During the trial of Markeith Loyd, retired crime scene investigator Karen Livingood testified about the evidence collected from the crime scene at 1157 Lescott Lane. She described retrieving various items, including firearms, ammunition, a bulletproof vest, a cell phone battery, a knit cap, and a black sweatshirt. Livingood explained proper procedures for packing and labeling the firearms and ammunition to ensure they were preserved for forensic analysis. She also talked about the fingerprint analysis on the recovered firearms, explaining the goal was to link the evidence to potential suspects. The defense questioned some discrepancies in the number of photographs taken on January 9th and January 15th, suggesting potential inconsistencies. This was the same argument in the last murder trial. Livingood clarified that additional photos were taken on the 15th under the direction of Detective Kitties to capture further evidence. She also addressed concerns about the accuracy of photographs showing strike marks, emphasizing the importance of precise documentation in investigations. Her testimony once again highlighted careful processes involved in crime spree investigations, stressing the importance of detailed evidence being collected and documentation in building a strong case. During the trial of Markeith Loyd, Richard Roof, a firearms analyst for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, testified about the firearms evidence in the case. His role was to analyze ballistic evidence to help establish links between firearms and specific incidents. Roof explained the process of firearm trace requests, noting that law enforcement agencies submit an ATF form 3312.1 to request a trace on a firearm. This form includes details about the firearm, the requesting agency, and information about the possessor. He also discussed how firearm toolmark examinations work, highlighting the significance of comparing unique markings left on bullets and casings to determine if they came from the same firearm. Roof referred to studies that assesses the reliability of this process, stating that error rates are typically low, often under 2%. During cross-examination, the reliability of firearm toolmark identification was questioned. While the method is widely accepted, it relies on subjective judgment based on observable patterns. Roof's testimony emphasized the importance of forensic analysis in linking firearms to specific events through detailed ballistic evidence. Then, the following day was the last days of information voiced throughout the courtroom. Markeith took the stand on his behalf. He stated that he entered the Walmart wearing a bulletproof vest and carrying a gun. When he exited the store, he believed he saw a gun aimed at him, which made him think he was about to be killed. In response, he drew his weapon and fired, describing the situation as a brief exchange of gunfire. Loyd claimed that when Lieutenant Clayton stopped shooting, he also stopped firing, and he estimated the entire incident lasted around 13 seconds. Loyd further explained his actions by sharing his fear of law enforcement, which stemmed from personal experiences and broader societal issues. He talked about growing up in an environment filled with violence, which he believed contributed to his perception that police were targeting him. He argued that his belief in being pursued by law enforcement influenced his decision to flee and avoid capture. To back up his claims, the defense brought in Dr. Jeffro Toomer, a clinical and forensic psychologist who diagnosed Loyd with several mental health disorders, including schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, PTSD, and psychosis. Dr. Toomer testified that these conditions impaired Loyd's judgment and made it difficult for him to understand right from wrong at the time of the shooting. Throughout his testimony, Loyd maintained he acted out of self-defense, believing he was in immediate danger from law enforcement. He portrayed himself as a victim of Semitic injustice and personal trauma, which he felt led to the tragic events at the Walmart. The trial continued on November 1st, 2021. Forensic consultant Christopher Robinson gave expert testimony on ballistics and evidence analysis. He reviewed the findings of FDLE firearms examiner Richard Roof, confirming that the casings and projectiles came from the defendant's firearms. Robinson also examined the gunshot wounds of Officer Clayton, noting that the vest she was wearing did not protect her, suggesting the shots were fired at close range as they went through that vest. Additionally, Robinson pointed out that one casing labeled K was pointed differently from the others, which suggested an inverted or differently angled shot. He explained that casings ejected from an inverted firearm tend to land on the opposite side of the shooter. Robinson emphasized the importance of casing locations and reconstructing crime scenes and identifying the shooter. His testimony supported the defense's claim that Lieutenant Clayton fired first and that Loyd returned fire in self-defense. Overall, Robinson's analysis of ballistics and evidence handling was key in understanding the dynamics of the shooting incident. In the courtroom, the atmosphere thickened as Ronald Stewart, his voice steady but filled with the weight of pain, took the stand via Zoom. The brother of Sade Dixon, the woman whose life was tragically taken by Markeith Loyd, Stewart recalled the evening that would forever change his life. It was a quiet night, he began, his words heavy. I was working on a web application at my mom's house when I heard the knock on the window. The memory hit hard as he continued. I went outside to talk to Markeith. I tried to stop the arguing between him and my sister, but things were getting out of hand. It was getting heated. We tried to get inside the house to safety. A brief silence followed as Stewart's voice cracked with the recollection. The door was locked. We couldn't get in. And then he pulled out a gun. A hush fell over the courtroom as Stewart paused, the memory still vivid. He just started shooting, no warning, no reason. I got hit, but my sister didn't make it. His eyes briefly closed as he spoke of the loss, of his sister's life taken too soon. The room held its breath, every word sinking into the minds of those present. Stewart's testimony shattered any illusion of self-defense that Loyd might have hoped to build. His account painted a scene of unprovoked violence, a man driven to shoot in a moment of vulnerability. As Stewart's voice ran out, it became clear. His testimony was a key piece of the puzzle, and in the end, it was his words, among many others, that helped lead a jury to convict him. Loyd was held accountable not just for the murder of Sade Dixon, but also for the death of Lieutenant Deborah Clayton, whose life was taken in a similar moment of unprovoked violence. After this depressing testimony, it was lunchtime. Ronald Stewart's testimony in this case should never have had occurred, because the death of his sister had nothing to do with the death of Lieutenant Deborah Clayton. Those are two separate events. Markeith Loyd's constitutional right to the Second Amendment and to a fair trial has been violated. I cannot imagine how hard it must have been to eat a sandwich for lunch after listening to that depression. Then it was time for basic information after this lunch break. Dr. Michael Gamache, a forensic psychologist, testified about Loyd's mental state at the time of the crimes. His role was to assess whether Loyd met the legal requirements for an insanity defense. Dr. Gamache explained that his evaluation process involved reviewing Markeith Loyd's medical and psychological records, conducting interviews with him and consulting with other mental health professionals involved in the case. He emphasized the need to consider cultural context when evaluating beliefs, explaining the difference between culturally accepted beliefs and those that might be considered delusions. Regarding the defense's argument that Loyd suffered from PTSD due to his childhood abuse, witnessing violence, and being a victim of a crime, Dr. Gamache acknowledged these traumatic experiences. However, he testified that they were not severe enough to impair Loyd's judgment to the point of meeting the insanity defense criteria. He stated that while Loyd had a history of trauma, he didn't show signs of psychosis or delusions that would render him legally insane at the time of the crimes. Dr. Gamache also reviewed the findings of Dr. Jeffro Toomer, another psychologist who had diagnosed Markeith Loyd with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, PTSD, and psychosis. While Dr. Toomer suggested that these conditions affected Loyd's judgment, Dr. Gamache disagreed, stating that there was no evidence to support these diagnoses or their impact on Loyd's legal responsibility. In conclusion, Dr. Gamache determined that although Markeith Loyd had significant mental health issues, they did not meet the legal criteria for insanity. He believed that Loyd was capable of understanding the wrongfulness of his actions and was legally responsible for the crimes he committed. Then forensic psychiatrist Dr. Michael Maher from last trial was called to assess Loyd's mental state during the events in question. Hired once again by the defense, Dr. Maher's evaluation was aimed to determine whether Loyd met the legal criteria for competency and insanity. Dr. Maher explained his evaluation process, which included a thorough review of Loyd's medical and psychological histories, interviews with him, and consultations with other professionals involved in the case. He emphasized the importance of considering cultural context, ethnicity, and social background when interpreting Loyd's beliefs and behaviors, distinguishing between culturally accepted beliefs and those that could be considered delusions. Regarding the defense's claim that Loyd suffered from PTSD due to early life traumas, such as childhood abuse and a traumatic kidnapping, Dr. Maher acknowledged these experiences. However, he concluded that they didn't impair Loyd's judgment enough to meet the requirements for an insanity defense. He stated that while Loyd had a history of trauma, he did not show signs of psychosis and delusional thinking that would make him legally insane at the time of the crimes. Another forensic psychiatrist testified afterwards. In the trial of Markeith Loyd, forensic psychiatrist Dr. Tanya Werner testified for the prosecution. She evaluated Loyd on September 27, 2021, and diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder and cannabis use disorder. However, she pointed out that antisocial personality disorder does not qualify for an insanity defense under Florida law. Dr. Werner concluded that, in her professional opinion, Loyd was sane at the time of the crime. Her testimony was crucial in countering the defense's claim that Loyd's mental health issues should exempt him from legal responsibility, but explaining that his conditions didn't meet legal criteria for insanity. Dr. Werner's insight supported the prosecution's argument that Loyd was accountable for his actions. The prosecution then rested its case. As well, finally, the defense rested its case. Once more rearrangements were made to prepare for closing arguments, it was time for the jury to start gathering all of the information they heard in the past days. In the trial of Markeith Loyd, both the prosecution and defense delivered compelling closing arguments that summarized their views on the shootings of Sade Dixon and Lieutenant Deborah Clayton. Prosecutor Ryan Williams focused on Lieutenant Clayton's commitment to her duty, stating that she was simply doing her job when she encountered Loyd outside the Walmart. He argued that Loyd's actions were driven by anger and a desire to escape, showing little regard for human life. Williams highlighted Loyd's extensive history of expressing disdain for law enforcement, referencing over 30,000 Facebook posts filled with distrust towards police. He pointed out that Loyd had a bulletproof vest labeled security under his shirt, suggesting he was prepared for violence. Williams then recounted the sequence of the events, where Loyd shot Lieutenant Clayton, causing her to fall, and then approached her to deliver fatal shots, emphasizing the premeditated nature of the crime. Defense attorney Terry Lennemon presented a different view, claiming that Loyd acted in self-defense. He argued that Lieutenant Clayton fired the first shot, which led Loyd to return fire in an effort to protect himself. Lennemon depicted a chaotic situation where Loyd, under gunfire, was merely trying to save his life. He questioned the expectation that Loyd should have fled while being targeted and stressed that such delusions are made in split seconds during such confrontations. The defense also raised concerns about potential errors in jury instructions, particularly regarding the definition of premeditated murder, urging the jury to carefully review witness testimony and the lack of solid evidence linking Loyd to the crime. They also challenged the credibility of certain witnesses and experts, pointing out inconsistencies in their testimonies. The courtroom atmosphere grew tense during the closing arguments, especially when the prosecution gave its rebuttal. Loyd became visibly upset, prompting Judge Leticia Marquez to warn him that he could be removed from the courtroom if his disruptions continued. Despite the warning, Loyd stayed in the courtroom, occasionally communicating with his defense attorney during the proceedings. At one point, he called his attorney over to share additional thoughts, though the details of their conversation wasn't disclosed. In the end, the closing argument set up two contrasting views: the prosecution's portrayal of a premeditated, senseless act, and the defense's argument that Loyd was simply trying to defend himself. The jury's role was to sift through these conflicting accounts, assess the credibility of the evidence, and decide which side's version of the events was more convincing. Once Judge Marquez read instructions to the jury, they were dismissed to deliberate. During the deliberations, the jury requested to read the documents of the testimonies. Then, on November 3rd, 2021, they reached a verdict. Markeith Loyd was found guilty on all 5 charges. The case was delayed for days. However, the 12-person jury returned to the courtroom by the end of the month, on the 29th day of November, to decide whether Markeith Loyd would get the death penalty or not. Throughout the past days, Judge Leticia Marquez had refused to toss this recent conviction nor start the trial all over again. There were many issues within the witnesses testifying. The trial seemed so biased, therefore, throughout most of the 29th day, there were delays, but by the end of that day, Judge Marquez successfully read the jury their penalty phase instructions. The following day, there were even more delays because extra rearrangements had to be made before starting this penalty phase. This day almost felt like a waste. The jury saw nothing, heard nothing. There was just a bunch of blather between attorneys without them present. Then on December 1st of that year, the trial finally carried on. Both the prosecution and defense presented their opening arguments. The prosecution sought the death penalty, focusing on Markeith Loyd's violent behavior as a pattern. They pointed out that he was on probation when he murdered his ex-girlfriend, Sade Dixon, and her unborn child, and later killed Lieutenant Clayton while trying to avoid capture. Prosecutor Ryan Williams emphasized that Loyd's actions were his own responsibility, and the prosecution urged the jury to hold him accountable for his choices. The defense, while acknowledging Loyd's convictions, argued that mitigating factors, particularly his mental health, should be considered. They highlighted his difficult upbringing, which involved exposure to violence and criminal behavior in his family. The defense also presented evidence of Loyd suffering from PTSD and a delusional disorder, claiming that these mental health issues affected his actions during the crimes. Defense attorney Terrence Lenneman suggested that life imprisonment without parole would be a more appropriate sentence rather than the death penalty. These opening statements set the stage for the jury to weigh the aggravating and mitigating factors in deciding Loyd's sentence for count 1, capital first-degree murder. The defense called Emma Watford, a retired nurse who worked in mental health medication and the Florida Department of Corrections, to testify. Watford explained that she had known Markeith Loyd since the 90s through her sons, who were friends with him at school. Watford recalled an incident from 1993 where Loyd and one of her sons were severely beaten. She described Loyd's injuries, saying his face looked like he had been struck with a gun. She also mentioned that after this event, Loyd became much more withdrawn and his behavior changed significantly. This testimony aimed to provide the jury with background on Loyd's difficult early life, hoping to present mitigating factors that could influence a sentencing decision. Then, Detective Greg McQuitter of the Orange County Sheriff's Office testified about the events surrounding Loyd's arrest in January 2017. McQuitter, who was part of the fugitive task force that helped capture Loyd, described his experience from the moment Loyd was handcuffed until he was taken to the Orlando police station. McQuitter testified that throughout this time, Loyd repeatedly mentioned that he was in pain and asked for medical attention. However, McQuitter stated that Loyd did not receive any medical care during the arrest process. For roughly an hour on the stand, Markeith Loyd's sister, Tanya, shared details about their difficult childhood in Carver Shores. She explained that their mother was often absent, forcing them to take care of themselves, which led to frequent fights in their neighborhood. Tanya also mentioned that when they moved to Pine Hills, conditions were so challenging that Markeith resorted to stealing and selling drugs to support his siblings. Then, after hearing stories of Markeith's unhealthy living conditions, everybody in the courtroom went to lunch. After the lunch break, Dr. William Anderson, a pathologist, was called to testify. His role was to offer medical insights, such as explaining the injuries sustained by the victims or the cause of death. The kind of testimony is typically presented in criminal trials to help the jury understand complex medical evidence. Dr. Geoffrey Colino, a forensic neurologist, testified about Markeith Loyd's mental health. Dr. Colino diagnosed him with organic psychosis and orbital frontal syndrome, conditions he believed were caused by brain damage from physical trauma. He explained that these conditions led to distorted perceptions, causing delusions and paranoia, which impaired Loyd's ability to control his actions in accordance with the law. Dr. Colino also mentioned that Loyd's psychosis involved a distorted focus on religious beliefs, such as viewing Christianity as devil worship and obsessing over ideas like the Trinity and the biblical story of Sodom and Gomorrah. He compared Loyd's perception of the world to looking through a funhouse mirror, suggesting a significant disconnect from reality. Dr. Colino was rudely interrupted during his testimony as two jurors started falling asleep as he spoke. Therefore, Judge Marquez had to set a 15-minute break. After the break, Dr. Colino continued testifying. He was the last witness to do so that day. On the fourth day of the penalty phase, the jury heard from Markeith Loyd's family, friends, and a psychologist who explained that he has long struggled with PTSD, which affects how he reacts to situations. The jury also heard from Detective McQuitter of the Orange County Sheriff's Office, who discussed how Loyd's pleas for medical attention were ignored following his arrest in January 2017. McQuitter testified that he was with Markeith Loyd for at least 45 minutes as he was transported from the scene of his arrest to the Orlando police station, and during that time, Loyd was never offered medical care. Additionally, this jury heard from Dr. James Campbell from last trial, the clinical psychologist for the defense, who stated that Loyd had suffered from PTSD due to his childhood abuse by his mother and a traumatic kidnapping and beating when he was young. Dr. Campbell explained that the trauma had lasting impact on Loyd's behavior and reactions. However, the prosecution questioned Campbell's evaluation, pointing out inconsistencies between Loyd's accounts of the incidents and how police had documented them. Several of Loyd's childhood friends testified as well, including one who stated that after the kidnapping, Loyd changed and became fearless. Odell Jones said he just, after that, from what I noticed, he wasn't scared of anybody. The jury also heard from Loyd's younger cousin, Jesse McCrea, the pastor, who described Loyd as a strong protector of his family in a neighborhood where violence was common. McCrea testified, "I knew I was safe. I always knew that I was safe. I always knew he would protect me." He continued testifying the next day. Pastor Jesse McCrea shared his experiences growing up with Loyd and mentioned that over time, Loyd distanced himself from a church-going lifestyle. Patricia Loyd, Markeith's mother, spoke about the anger issues of her husband Robert, Markeith's father, and recalled an incident where he hit her in the eye, sending her to the hospital, the same story she told in the other murder trial. Patricia described the violent moment, saying, "He got mad and slapped me, and it felt like I saw stars, like in cartoons. I just prayed, asking God not to let me faint, as I was holding Markeith in my arms. I knew Markeith was important to him, so I threw him at him." She admitted that she neglected her home and was aware that Markeith helped provide for his siblings by stealing food. She also mentioned, once again, that she admitted him to a mental health facility, but this time she said it was due to his anger and involvement in drug dealing, not just to drug dealing. Dr. Michael Maher, a clinical and forensic psychiatrist, testified that Loyd always felt like he was targeted by bad people. Then Dr. Marvin Dunn, a retired professor of psychology at Florida International University, offered insights into Loyd's background, explaining that he was influenced by criminal elements within his own family, who taught him how to sell drugs and evade the police. Dunn noted, "He came from a poisoned family environment, and what can you expect from that, except for someone getting involved in this kind of behavior?" By the end of the day, both the prosecution and defense announced that they would shortly be resting their cases, and that the next day, a Saturday, would be a day without the jury to discuss how this trial would move forward and be prepared to have the jury deliberate. That Saturday, Judge Marquez took the morning to review the cases. Afterwards, final arrangements were made, the jury instructions were written, and Markeith agreed to testify. The defense also asked Judge Marquez to take the death penalty out of the case. However, after so much arguing, she refused to do so. The judge also stated that Markeith could be sentenced consecutively to his charges. Then, when the jury came back the coming Monday, the trial overall reached its last day. Markeith's daughter, Kiana Loyd, took the stand to testify in his defense. She shared that they had a close relationship. She also recalled her father always being there for her during her childhood, picking her up from daycare and spending time with her, even after her mother remarried. Kiana also described her father as a loving and supportive parent who provided for her and her siblings. She also mentioned that he deeply regretted not being more present due to his time in prison. Kiana further explained that even while incarcerated, her father continued to offer advice and encouragement, urging her to make good decisions and pursue her dreams, such as becoming a lawyer to help their family. The defense also presented videos showing Markeith Loyd interacting affectionately with his granddaughter, showcasing his role as a caring family member. These testimonies were aimed at giving the jury a fuller view of Loyd's character, highlighting the positive relationships he had and the supportive side of his personality. Orlando Police Lieutenant Jonathan Cute testified about his role in the arrest of Loyd in January 2017. He explained that he ordered Loyd to crawl toward him, but when Loyd only moved with his arms, Lieutenant Cute thought he might be hiding a weapon and could be a threat. To protect himself, Lieutenant Cute said he kicked Loyd in the face, which damaged his left eye. After that gruesome story, it was lunchtime. Then, after lunch, the jury came back to hear more. Assistant State Attorney Stacey Salmons testified during the penalty phase. Her role was to present evidence and arguments supporting the prosecution's case for sentencing. The prosecution wrapped up its case on December 1st, 2021, after presenting various witnesses, including victim impact statements and expert testimonies. Following this, the defense began calling witnesses such as forensic neurologist Dr. Geoffrey Colino and Loyd's family members to offer mitigating evidence. Assistant State Attorney Salmons played a key role in the prosecution's efforts throughout this phase of the trial. The state was then finished overall with the rebuttal witnesses and announced that they were ready for closing arguments. The following day, the defense also announced they were ready for closing arguments. Before the closing arguments in the penalty phase, Markeith Loyd refused to testify. During the ending of the penalty phase, both sides delivered closing arguments aimed at persuading the jury about the appropriate sentence. For the prosecution's closing argument, Assistant State Attorney Ryan Williams focused on Markeith Loyd's violent history, particularly pointing out that he had murdered his pregnant ex-girlfriend Sade Dixon while on probation for a violent crime. He also described the brutal way Loyd killed Lieutenant Deborah Clayton, including the final shot to her head while she was on the ground. Williams argued that Loyd was a danger to society and should be sentenced to death. Such an unlawful closing argument mentioning cases that had nothing to do with this trial. Defense attorney Terrence Lennemon urged the jury to consider Loyd's troubled childhood and mental health issues. He explained that Loyd grew up in an environment filled with violence and poverty, which, along with his PTSD, contributed to his actions. Lennemon asked the jury to show mercy and choose a life sentence instead of the death penalty, pointing to these mitigating factors. The closing arguments offer two different perspectives, with the prosecution stressing the severity of Loyd's crimes, and the defense urging the jury to consider his past and mental health when deciding his sentence. The jury would then be dismissed for lunch. After that lunch break, Judge Marquez instructed them into deciding the possible fate of Markeith Loyd, whether they would recommend the death penalty or not. They took the rest of the day to deliberate a verdict and stayed at a hotel that night. Then, the following day, they reached a verdict, They recommended the death penalty. The following month, Judge Marquez heard testimony from experts to decide whether to send Markeith to death row. On January 14th, 2022, a Spencer hearing and pre-sentencing hearing was held in Markeith Loyd's case, giving both the defense and prosecution a final opportunity to present arguments before sentencing. During the hearing, family members of Lieutenant Deborah Clayton gave emotional statements about the impact of her death. Then, Judge Marquez announced the final sentencing decision would be delivered on March 3rd, 2022. Before that, on February 7th, Judge Marquez refused to redo the penalty phase. Then, on March 3rd, she sentenced Markeith Loyd to death for the murder charge. Life in prison without parole for the first-degree attempted murder, 5 years in prison for aggravated assault, 20 years in prison for armed carjacking, and 15 years in prison for illegal firearms possession. The sentences were ordered to be served consecutively to one another. Markeith appealed this case. However, he officially lost the appeal in 2024. He was not allowed to withdraw the insanity plea. The higher courts and appellate institutions rejected all of his claims. After sentencing, he was admitted into a state death row prison, the Union Correctional Institution, where he is currently awaiting execution. The date is yet to be set. Thank you for listening to this episode of Strawberry Ink. Please be sure to share this podcast and the episode. And please follow, please like, please continue showing support towards me. Have a good rest of your day.